Welcome, everyone. How wonderful to be together in one mountain, many paths, where our mission is what Barbara Marx Hubbard and Dr. Marc Gafni call a planetary awakening in love through unique self-symphonies. We are activating a new humanity, and we are awakening as a new species, Homo Amor, the fulfillment of Homo sapiens. As a church, synagogue, mosque, temple, zendo, no one is excluded, everyone is included, and we come together to attune to the evolutionary impulse awakening within us. Welcome home, everyone. I am Kristina, the co-executive producer, along with Krista Josefa, Jamie Long, and Jacqueline Clark. And we are so delighted to be together with each and every one of you for week 283 of our live community broadcast. What a privilege it is to be part of a global community where we contribute to humanity's flourishing. Use the Zoom and the Facebook chat functions to say hello, to let us know where you're from, to express your prayers, and to resonate the Dharma. On Zoom, check that your chat settings say everyone so that we can all hear from you. Sign up for and read our weekly emails. There you find our replays, our community activities, feature videos, volunteer opportunities, celebrations, surprises, and inspiration. Care to step into the fantastic work of the great library, the Homo Amor Project? Reach out to me for the holy opportunities. And my email is in the chat box now. We had such a wonderful gathering on Wednesday, and all the work that's happening is such an inspiring symphony to be part of. What to expect today? First, a Dharma recap from myself. Then Dr. Marc Gafni will set our intention. David resonates the evolutionary love code that we're working with. And then we move into our evolutionary sermon with Dr. Gafni and sometimes with a clip from Barbara Marx Hubbard. And then we move into meditation to enter prayer. And to close, Krista will invite us deeper into community. And then we bring everyone on at the end for our goodbyes and for a small intimate dance. Marc writes evolutionary love codes. Marc and Barbara studied the codes together, often comparing them with Barbara's own 52 codes for conscious self-evolution. These codes crystallize the new story of humanity, quote, evolving the course of consciousness and culture, which is the source code of love, unquote. We have the privilege to be part of the emergence of this Dharma, of these first principles and this first value. The Dharma gates are open. Every week we are blessed. So know that we do try to end at the top of the hour, but we often will go over. I welcome all who are new. We need you. Know that each week is a standalone, and every week builds on the week before. One mountain, many paths is radically committed to telling the new universe story. Now for my recap from last week. Ukraine demands that we engage with full power in the overwhelming moral imperative to articulate a universal grammar of value. Feel the tragedy of this moment. In order to respond to not only today, but to respond to the inevitable tomorrows, in order to know How do we respond to a nuclear superpower which invades a sovereign state? On the one hand, Ukraine is being beyond heroic. For instance, Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, said when they offered to airlift him out, "I am staying." We nor he knows whether he'll be alive today or tomorrow. We're witnessing vast heroism, and we need to understand how we confront the Putins of the world and not stand by. We're not putting troops or peacekeeping forces on the ground. We're not creating a no-fly zone over Ukraine. We're afraid these things will give Vladimir Putin the justification to engage in a tactical nuclear strike, the result of which would be a mushroom cloud. Nonetheless, the West is standing on a vision of value. In terms of levels of consciousness, the West is standing, at least in principle, for universal human rights, democracy, the right to a fair trial, proper information gathering, and analysis of evidence, all in order to create fairness in the structures of society. Has the West made X amounts of mistakes? Is the West wildly imperfect and some of Putin's critique of the West correct? Yes. Putin has a keen sense of and has actually helped foment in the West division, polarization, and collapse. He has a keen sense of danger, of the high tech, of the collapse of value, of the narcissistic self-engagement. Still, we can't engage in moral equivalence. Clearly, the values and story articulated by Putin in the public space today are akin to the values of Stalin, Mao, and Hitler. The entire future depends on our capacity to articulate a universal grammar of value, rooted in a story of value which is real, intrinsic, inherent, and arouses our political will in serious and powerful ways. Value evolves, and some values are 1,000 times better than other values. Our value is goodness, truth, and beauty, rooted in a shared story of value, story as an intrinsic value of cosmos. And those things mean something. Today must open the path to tomorrow, in which we reclaim value as real and articulate together with our Ukrainian and Russian brothers and sisters a shared story of evolving first principles and first values. Story means the universe is going somewhere, and it's going towards more and more value and more love. This can bring together a United Nations beyond power politics and beyond real politic. If we don't do that, it's over. Let's love in the deepest way we can in this response to this moment in Ukraine, this moment in which we are all quite literally Ukrainians. Now, I invite us to more deeply enter into the holy and sacred space of one mountain, many paths, and I turn my word to you, Dr. Marc Gafni.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Hi, everybody. Yeah. So one, this is all about Ukraine, and it's not about Ukraine at all, right? It's all about Ukraine, obviously, and it's not about Ukraine at all. Okay, and that's critical, right? And it's very, very important to understand both what's unique about this situation and what's absolutely not unique about this situation. At stake here is everything. At stake here is the very future of humanity. But at stake here is the future of humanity, not only because there's a horrific war in Ukraine, which is horrific and requires all of our attention and all of our support and all of our love, as does every conflict. The unique distinction of this conflict tragically should not be that it involves white Europeans, right? As opposed to brown or yellow or black, right? That should not be the distinction. And there is some of that which is tragic and needs to be overcome in every possible way. Right? We judge people by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. And that is our dream, and that is the reality we have to make real. And so child soldiers in the Congo has to be infinitely valuable, right? And 10, 11,000 people, right, that die every day from starvation or hunger-related malnutrition has to be in front of our eyes. And we can't let our attention focus on Ukraine in a way where we become, right? And it's a big deal, right? We become so Ukraine focused that actually we forget, right, the massive suffering, right, that exists in reality that requires our address. And I want to just say something about it. We're gonna find our way step by step, okay? And we're in mad joy, and we're in mad honor, and we're in mad pain, right? We live in a world of outrageous pain. The only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. And outrageous love at this moment means to do everything we can to help in every possible way, and to articulate the new source code of consciousness and culture, to articulate the new source code of consciousness and culture, to tell the new story of value, because as we're watching carefully, it's only a new story of value that's going to actually allow us to move through this Ukraine and all the future Ukraines and all of the suffering around the world, right? The Archimedean lever with which we can change the world is only a new story of what story is, a new understanding of story, and a new story of value. And we have to be energized by that, right, in a huge way. We have to be radically and wildly energized by that and responsible to it, right? We're in this moment, right? We live in a world of outrageous beauty. And it's the outrageous beauty of human beings and of nature, right? And of the universe, right? A love story. It's that outrageous beauty that tells us that outrageous pain is a violation. That it's not supposed to be that way. That we're actually wired for pleasure. We're wired for goodness. We're wired for truth. We're wired for beauty. That outrageous pain is a violation of the value structures of the universe. Right? And yet, Ukraine is also unique. And it's unique in that, one, there's an actual impending confrontation between superpowers. There's been regional conflicts and proxy wars over the past 6-7 decades, but there's been no direct conflict. And the direct conflict, right, takes place in the shadow of a nuclear context. There's talk of tactical nuclear strikes. And so we're in this very, very, right, strange, right, situation, right? And let's be really super focused with this, right? Let's stay super focused with this, okay? Let's stay together. Okay, let's follow it step by step, okay? So we're in this moment in which we're refusing to intervene, right, and impose a no-fly zone over the Ukraine or actually put troops on the ground because we feel like we're going to push Putin over the edge and create a direct conflict, which will then result in a tactical nuclear strike that obviously we want to avoid, right, with all of our beings. And yet, there's a strange and slippery slope here, right? And it's not clear, right? For example, let's say that Russia would succeed in Ukraine, God forbid. And let's say Russia then attacks Estonia, Latvia. Right, Eugis? Right? Let's say that, and Eugis is my friend who lives in that region of the world who's here with us today, who's just in my living room. Right? So let's say that there actually is an attack by Putin on a NATO ally. And Biden has said, and NATO has said, we don't give 1 inch. So at that point, do we give up the NATO ally, or do we actually confront Putin even at the risk of a tactical nuclear response? It's at what point do you actually stop the bully? And the calculus of risk here is very, very, very painful. Right? Welcome, Rita, from Latvia. Right? So let's just really understand this. Right? And what does that mean? Right? In other words, we won't take the risk for Ukraine, because even though Ukraine was in the movement towards becoming part of NATO, it hadn't yet gone through that process. So therefore, we don't take the risk, right, for Ukraine, but we do take the risk for a NATO ally, right? In other words, what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? Okay, so that's complex. And is the issue, right, the expansion of NATO eastward? I don't think so. I don't think that's the issue, right? And I'm deeply aware of all those arguments. So we're at a moment which is incredibly complex and which requires enormous wisdom, right? And there's wild contradictions in the space. And so we have to actually find our way, okay? We actually have to find our way, right? So let's find our way. And I'm going to ask everyone to kind of step in to the center. We'll have time for the chat box later, right? But at this moment, let's actually step in and let's see if we can find our way. The issue at stake, as we said, is story and value. Okay, story and value. The issue at stake is not realpolitik. Yes, there's obviously realpolitik, right? I'm deeply familiar, obviously, with all the issues of oil and gas and population and borders, right? And I've tracked all those issues all for the last decade. So those are all critical issues. But actually, something deeper is driving it. As long as we understand this purely in terms of realpolitik, we can't ignore realpolitik. We can't ignore economics. We can't ignore, right, the various moves made by the United States and Russia, right, over the years. Nonetheless, there is something underneath that. And that's a critical issue. And I want to just say this clearly, right? I don't in any way hold the United States, right, or the NATO alliance as some kind of, sacred cow that never makes a mistake and that should be supported no matter what, in all circumstances, right, just because, right? So that's obviously not the case. At the same time, and this is a very big at the same time, and I want to say this super clearly, there is no moral equivalence between the Western worldview and Russia's worldview today. That's an incredibly important thing to say. And to try and reduce this conflict to a power play between superpowers, which is value neutral is precisely to miss the point of what's happening here. And I know there's an enormous amount of conversation, right, in specifically even liberal circles in America, right, in woke circles particularly, right, which are arguing in various ways that the United States has pressed Russia into this. The analogy we drew last week, which has been drawn all over in, dozens of articles, right? America went to the brink of nuclear war when there were missiles in Cuba, right? Obviously, when NATO is pushed all the way eastward, right, Putin is going to be, right, aroused and enraged. Now, whether or not Putin should have gone, whether or not NATO should have gone all the way eastward, right, is a more complex issue than we can discuss here. Right? That's an open question. You can understand it in a number of ways. Nonetheless, there's zero question that NATO, and we all know this to be true, has no intention whatsoever of invading Russia. That's just not true. That's not the value structure, right, that guides NATO. It's not the value structure that guides the United States. Now, am I aware that the United States has entered into countries, right, and toppled dictators in Latin America, right, and invaded Iraq, right? Am I aware of Afghanistan, etc., the whole list? Of course I am. Libya, Gaddafi. Right, of course I am. Do I think the United States was precisely right in each of those cases? No. I think each one is complex. Each one deserves analysis. Was America correct in Vietnam? Right? No. Right? And yes, right? Complicated. Right? There was right, 1963, 4 was something, 65, 66 was something else, 67, 68 was something else, 69 was something else. Actually, I have to enter into these issues in a complex and deep way. Right? But here's what's true. Here's what's true. The overarching motivation, right? The spark of the sacred at the root of the American vision, right, is, right, a vision of value. It's a vision of universal human rights. It's a vision that moves beyond all of the racisms and all of the ethnocentrisms, right? But more importantly, it's a vision that stands for the correct gathering of information, the right to do real sense making, right? It stands for the personal. It stands for the dignity, the irreducible dignity of the individual, right? It stands for, right, an entire set of values that actually are explicitly defaced and rejected by what Russia is standing for today. And that's a very big deal, right? Does the United States, right, has the United States, right, honored some of those values in the breach? Yes, there was a Vietnam War protest movement that ripped America apart, right? And occasionally things went bad, like at Kent State where 4 people were killed. And that became a massive American tragedy. But there's zero comparison that's legitimate and valid, right, between that and between the utter suppression, right, of protest, right, the brutality, right, the murder, right, that is actually par for the course in a closed society, whether it's China or whether it's Putin's Russia, which is run as a top-down oligarchy in which the people are disempowered, in which information is suppressed, in which there's a fundamental arbitrariness to human life, in which the masses, right, of the people are actually ignored in multiple ways. Groups are singled out, right, and put in concentration camps, right, aka China, and the list goes on, right? To suggest that there's a moral equivalence, right, between the West, right, and between the positions evinced by Russia and China is fundamentally to misunderstand value, right? That's a postmodern move, which basically says, right, there is no value that's real. This is just a question of realpolitik, right? It's just a question. America's done the same thing. No difference between America and Russia. That's just not true. It's not true if you think value is real. A, first you have to think value is real. B, you have to understand that there's an evolution of value. Okay, number one, value is real. Number two, it's not eternal and absolute values, there are evolving values. So for example, democracy is an evolving value. 1,000 years ago, the value of democracy didn't exist in the world. Today we have a value of democracy. That's an evolving value, right? And although democracy is imperfect, right? Democracy is, of all the forms of government available today, right? It's actually the one that is most supportive of value, which is most supportive of goodness, which is most supportive of godness. Now, do we have to challenge democracy in the ways that it becomes corrupt, in the ways that it becomes degraded? We do, fiercely. And we've been in One Mountain. Part of our mission is to challenge the collapse of value structures when they happen in democracy, whether that's in the United States where there's millions and millions of people without health care, whether that's in the global technocracy, which is devaluing the personal and devaluing the individual, which needs to be challenged and dismantled in a fundamental way. Of course we challenge, just like we challenged the Vietnam War, just like the Paris Spring, right? Of course we need to challenge, right? But at the same time, we need to recognize that there's not a moral equivalence, right? And we need to reject moral equivalence because that's what this is about today, okay? So that's one. And I want to just read you, so just so that we can learn to make distinctions. I'm not going to cite you who this article is from. Okay, I'm not going to cite you who this article I'm about to read is from, but and I'm not going to cite the name or the name of the article, but it's from a well-known colleague, and we have lots of not lots, at least 5 or 6 mutual, close friends. We've actually never spoken, and I'm sure a lovely human being, I'm sure, and skip the trying to guess. But I want to just give you a sense, this major article getting circulated, it's been sent to me by a bunch of people, which is all about moral equivalence. It ducks around it, but it is at its core. So for example, right, I read this morning of an upcoming parlay. This I'm reading from one article as an example. Upcoming parlay between Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. In the case of Zelensky, the righteousness is obvious, right? And he lists Zelensky's claim. Very next paragraph. In the case of Putin, the righteousness comes, I suppose, from historical narrative of NATO expansionism, missiles on Russia's borders, oppression, and mass killing of ethnic Russians in the Ukraine, and so forth. Now, complete moral equivalence. Then the writer ducks around it. He says the point is not here that each side is equally right. That's the most he's willing to give to non-moral equivalence. He's got to slip that in. But he said, but the more important thing is that each side believes that it's right, and that's where his emphasis goes. But that's just the very beginning. That's just the very, very beginning. 2, and I want to just want to give you an example of both moral equivalence and how value, particularly and even in the woke world, right, value gets lost. So let's go the next step. Okay? So he said, let's talk about Putin. Right? Of course we can't pin our hopes on, Putin's compassion, although judging from his interviews, I don't think he's a heartless man. Hardened, yes, and shrewd, but not the soulless monster war propaganda portrays. That's a heavy accusation to make against another human being, but we tend to make it lightly in the heat of conflict. Okay? Well, that's complicated, my friend. That's complicated, right? In other words, yes, right, America standing for value, right, has engaged in, right, acts which there was tragic collateral, right, and civilians being killed, right? The British bombed Dresden, right, in which 40,000 people, right, were killed in one night. And the British were wrong to bomb Dresden that way. And so we need to hold them fully and absolutely accountable. Nonetheless, right, the way the British, right, and the United States, right, the way the British, stay close, the way the British, right, and the United States, right, have held value and held individual human life and is fundamentally different than the way Putin has. Putin carpet bombs in Aleppo, carpet bombs in Chechnya, right? For Putin, right, the entire notion of the individual human life is simply not of value, right? In the way that it is in the West. There's not the same sense of the value of the individual, right? And the value of the personal, right? And the intentional, for the sake of essentially oligarchy and power, not for the sake of a vision of value. There's not a vision of value, right, in Russia today that's arousing people around the world. That's not happening. There's an oligarchical power move that's based on authoritarian control, a complete repressive, closed society for the benefit of the very few on top, and the willingness to carpet bomb in Aleppo and any place else in the world to directly target civilians, right, as the object of war, right, for the sake of no value other than pure naked power. That's completely different than the Allies, right, fighting the Nazi war machine. And the Allies made significant mistakes fighting the Nazi war machine. The Nazi war machine killed most of my family, right? So for me to say the Allies made significant mistakes is a big deal. And they shouldn't have bombed Dresden. That was actually the corruption of the circle around Churchill that actually falsified data, right, on how Britain itself responded to the London Blitz in order to persuade Churchill to actually repeat the London Blitz 10 times over in Dresden, which Britain never should have done. So yes, of course we challenge, right, huge mistakes made. Nonetheless, right, the Allies fighting Hitler, right, and the Nazi war machine and fascism at its absolute worst, it is in no sense comparable to Putin, right, or China. And we need to understand the difference. And again, right, I want to keep going, and I want to keep reading this article, which is, again, a very, very popular woke article. Okay, very, very popular woke article. Okay, step at a time. So this writer keeps going and he says, right, but if we must be loud in our revulsion, right, but it must be, if we're to be consistent, we also must look with shame at the wars instigated by our own country, as we lived obliviously to them, shielded from their horrible reality by our own justification, just as Putin is shielded by his. Right? That is moral equivalence. Okay, classical moral equivalence. And again, we should critique America in every possible way. But the analogy between America's wars and Putin's wars and the worldview, right, of the United States of universal human rights and the worldview of Putin, right, and the amount of money the United States, for example, pours into education around the world, unparalleled by any country in world history. Nothing even vaguely close. The amount of money poured into aid and education, right, around the world by the United States, right? And it goes on and on and on. So to make a moral equivalence, right, between the United States and Russia, right, is wrong, right? To in any way portray the United States as always a knight in shining armor that's not without significant corruption, significant, right, degradation of value. And to not challenge that value is a tragedy. That's absolutely, we got to challenge that value. And the United States and the Western world is a dream in the making. It's a work in progress, right? It's a dream that's not fulfilled. But we got to hold the dream. And we got to make the dream true, because the value structure, the worldview to hold the dream is there. And that's absolutely critical. And I'm going to go just another example. Okay, we were rightly appalled at the invasion of Ukraine. But where were these sensibilities when our own countries and alliances invaded, right, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen? I can go through each one of those cases, which I know quite well. And the moral equivalence here is absolutely not true, right? The vision of value, right, which guided those invasions, right, together with the realpolitik and the nature of the realpolitik, the nature of the desire for American hegemony, right, is not a purely motivated base power play. It's actually a desire, right, for Western values, right? That Western values, actually the values of an open society, should actually stand against the values of a closed society. And we're at a moment in the world in which we're either going to be able to transform the world into, right, a multipolar world of open societies. We don't want a unipolar American world. We want a multipolar world, obviously. We want a symphony of unique self-nations. We want a unique self-symphony, right, which is based on a shared vision of value. Right? That is, so again, the moral equivalence by this writer, right, is beyond absurd, wrong, and actually is based on a postmodern, right, subjectification of value, right, a refusal to actually do the hard work. It's based on these kind of broad, we invaded, you invaded, right? And those are the same. That's not true, right? Killing is not killing, right? It's not true. I sat with the Dalai Lama in his bedroom, in Dharamsala, where we were talking in 2005. And we both talked about this notion that this kind of moral equivalence between all forms of killing is actually, right, a violation of the sacred, right? Not all forms of killing are equal, right? When I kill to defend my family against a murderer, it's not the same as the murderer, right? And yes, of course, there's complex issues of realpolitik, and obviously those influence. But even realpolitik and the power move, right, is animated, right, by a vision of value. And I want to go just one more step. Right. The boycotts, here it goes. Exercised by hypocrites, sanctions have little effect. So this writer is now saying, okay, the sanctions are being exercised by hypocrites, right? And instead we should say, we no longer stand for war. We'll dismantle our global military bases. We'll disband NATO. We'll stop placing missiles on your border. We'll rejoin the ABM treaty. We'll reduce our nuclear arsenal. We'll shrink our military. We'll stop invading other countries. We'll cease supporting coups, juntas, and torture regimes. Right? Now, that sounds perfect, but four phrases there are very important. Right? And what the moral equations are and who we support needs to be very carefully examined. And there's no question the Western world has made mistakes. Nonetheless, the notion that the United States should unilaterally dismantle its 850 bases actually is a victory for Putin, and a victory for Putin and a victory for China is a victory for closed societies, right, that debase, right, the fundamental notion of universal human rights, the fundamental notion of individual dignity, the fundamental notion of information gathering and sense making, right, that's actually accurate, the fundamental notion of governance for the people and by the people, right? And so these kind of moral analogies are completely horrific. Okay, and I'll just give you the last moral analogy, the last moral equivalence in this article, right? He says this is what people are saying. War is okay as long as it's justified. Well, guess what? Everyone thinks their own war is justified. Most ordinary Russians fervently believe theirs is right now. Okay? Right? And in other words, so this is a huge problem. This is a huge, huge problem. And the article goes on into, 10 more, right, examples of just a kind of shocking moral equivalence. And so I can't ignore that. Right? It's not true, as the article goes on to say, that Putin was generated by a projection, right, of the United States' shadow. Right? That's the next move in the article. Right? That actually we generated Putin because Putin is, directly generated by the United States projecting its shadow. Right? I'll just give you the last line. After the Cold War, the United States was desperate for an enemy by which to define itself as good. Right? Now, I understand that. I've written that many times. Yes. Right? When we don't have genuine eros, we create pseudo-eros by placing someone else outside the circle to give ourselves the illusion that we're inside the circle. That's absolutely true. And the United States was, in a certain sense, I wouldn't say desperate for an enemy. The United States lost its internal cohesion because there wasn't an interior eros, right, of a shared vision of value. That's absolutely true. Having said that, right, here's the next line. The arrogant, violent bully generates enemies in the image of his paranoid fear that others are as he is. So he's talking about the United States, creating Putin. The arrogant, violent bully generates enemies in the image of his paranoid fear that others are as he is. The question of whether Putin and Russia are evil misses the point. So again, he couldn't be more dead wrong. One, it's not Putin and Russia. Russia's not evil. The Russian people are gorgeous. Putin may well be evil, right? And that question does not miss the point. It's the question of value does not miss the point, right? No. Essentially what he's saying is no, the question of value misses the point. No, wrong, and wrong again. Wrong again, okay? Right? This is a shocking violation of value. And again, I don't want to name the writer. The point is not to name the writer. The point is to look at the content here, okay? We're not in high school, okay? So let's kind of hold this, right? Where we want to hold it here. It's not about who the writer is, it's not about the name of the article, it's about the content, right? It's not actually true that the United States, right, is the arrogant, violent bully that generated Putin, right, out of their own paranoid fear, right, that he is as the United States is. No, and the question of whether Putin is evil does not miss the point, okay? Does not miss the point, right? We actually need to be able to actually make moral statements, and that's critically important, right? We can't make moral statements criticizing our own policies. We can't hold our own leaders in the West to standards of value unless value is real. And we can't hold our own leaders to standards of value if we're not willing to hold the world to a standard of value. And if we engage in a kind of postmodern, right, moral equivalence where we don't make distinctions, right, the wisdom of distinctions and the inability by woke writers, right, to make a distinction at this moment between Western values, which are, again, often honored in the breach. We should critique the heck out of the West, okay? Of course we should. And understand the distinction between what the West has been and what it hasn't been. You know, Garry Kasparov, right, who was the Russian chess champion, right, who then became one of the most important, you know, advocates for democracy, right, in Russia. Garry just talked, you know, really beautifully, you know, in a recent interview about the utter absurdity, right, of suggesting that Putin, right, is being driven or created by the United States. He said that kind of classical Western woke thinking is the single most damaging thing, right, to the actual need for regime change, right, you know, to take place in the Soviet Union. Now, again, I'm not saying that all of NATO's decisions in moving eastward were necessarily correct. That's not the point. I'm not doing a kind of full, obviously in this hour and a half, I'm not doing a full realpolitik. What I'm saying is I'm focused on one issue. Jan, my dear friend, welcome, right? And everyone, right? We cannot engage in moral equivalence, okay? Right? We can't engage in moral equivalence. We need to actually be able to distinguish between structure stages of consciousness, right? And structure stages of consciousness are real. They're not created. And the structure stage of consciousness that Putin is emerging out of, right, and the value structure that he's emerging out of deny both the evolution of value, right? Putin's in a pre-modern imperialist, right, regressive mode, right, of the kind the world hasn't seen of its kind since World War II, or since maybe the Korean War. It's a disaster. So that's one. That's point one. And I got through point one of 10. We haven't even begun. Okay, but let's go now. Let's keep going. Okay? So now what I want to do is I want to try and read this conflict with you, right, in a deep way. And I have great hope for the possibility here, right? I have great hope, you know, for Russia joining the community of nations with the greatness of the Russian heart and soul, and for China joining the community of nations. But that needs to happen through a universal grammar of value and a recognition that not all stories are the same, and that actually there are stories of value that reflect the evolving intrinsic values of cosmos, right? And let me critique, as long as we're critiquing, let me critique, and as fiercely as we did the anonymous author, right? And the author that I just read, I left as anonymous. One, because we have mutual friends. Two, because there's no particular point when I'm pointing this person out. This next person I won't leave as anonymous, right? And I've spoken about, and again, also a wonderful human being. I've talked about him many times, Yuval Harari, right? You know, a wonderful human being, I'm sure, in 1,000 different ways, right? And you know, this is where we also have to critique Yuval's collapsed value. He said stories aren't real, right? That's a very big deal. Stories are real, right? And when Yuval writes himself, there's no distinction between, just stay close with me, there's no distinction between Libya's Gaddafi and universal human rights, which is essentially the intent, the sense of chapter 2 in his book Sapiens. He's actually citing, right, with some version, right, of moral nihilism and of the more tragic views of value that are held probably by Putin himself, whatever Putin's public stance is, right, which is, you know, Mother Russia and Christian values, right? Clearly, he's not actually embracing either of those in any sense, shape, or form. We'll bracket that for a second. Putin's actually standing for a realpolitik, for raw power, right? And values a convenient tool. But actually, structurally, I want everyone to get this. Actually, postmodernism is Putin's best friend. And I want everyone just to understand this, right? And it's the postmodern view that Yuval is parroting, which says there is no distinction between Gaddafi's Libya and universal human rights, that actually is what Putin's read very deeply in the West. And although he cloaks his positions with Mother Russia and the Russian Orthodox Church, really, he's holding at the core, right? At the core. Let's understand this. At the core, what is he holding? Right? He's holding a postmodern position. There's actually a complete alliance here, right, between the postmodern position as expressed by the likes of Harari, right, and beautiful man, right, who's taken a very different tack during this war. He's kind of covered over the postmodernism, right? But actually, it's right there under the surface. If you don't declare value to be real, then you can't challenge violations of value, which is why, as my friend the Dalai Lama said, right, moral equivalences, right, moral equivalences stand against value. And they stand against, right, the future of the world. Right? If we can't make moral distinctions, right, we're lost. Okay? And let me try and just give you a structure for it for a second, then we're going to move to part two. So level one, let me try and do this in levels of consciousness. Okay, level one. So level one would be absolute moral distinctions, us against them. Everyone get that? Level one is absolute moral distinctions, us against them. That's level one. That's the level, right, that postmodernism, people like the writer I just cited, people like Yuval Harari, are actually correctly critiquing. Does everyone get that's level one? Right? Us against them, we're the good guys, those are the bad guys, right? And, there's nothing, right? There's nothing that ultimately rises above that split between us and them. It's an us and them, right? We're right, they're wrong. Yay, America, right? Russians are all evil, right? Or right, that an us-them realpolitik, right? That is completely not the case. And the writer I cited, postmodernism in general, Foucault, right? Harari not as a thinker, but as an intelligent parrot, right, of the postmodern position, which he assumes in 10 different ways, which he hasn't thought about clearly, but we've had that discussion in a different time, right? They're correct, though. They're 1,000% correct in challenging, right, that level one. So then they go to level two. Now, level two here's level two. Now, actually, all sides, right, have moral deficiencies, right? All sides, right, have impaired value. All sides have some good dimensions and some sacred dimensions, and all sides have, right, some dimension of value that actually seems to make a difference, even, and so actually we're all in this together. There's actually no need to make distinctions. Distinctions are about level one, right? Everyone is some strange combination between the holy and the unholy, right? Between value, right, and anti-value, right? And so that's level two. And then at this level two, and since value is not real anyways, let's stay close. And since value is not real anyways, right? Value is actually not a real structure. So the entire enterprise of making the distinction at level one is absurd. So there's a two-part move made in level two. One is, right, is structurally, right? Level two points out that there are value collapses on both sides. It's not just us and them. And number two, level two's second point is, and value is not real anyways, right? So it's all just story. So the notion of having just us against them, our story against theirs, doesn't make sense. That's level two. Does everyone get that? The writer I cited is clearly in level two. Harari is clearly in level two. Okay? Level three, right? Value comes back online. Okay? Value comes back online. Okay? And when value comes back online, okay, stay close here. And I'm going to ask the chat box to kind of step in. Okay, step into the content, okay? Right? Because the content's it's deeper. We got to follow this like line by line. Number one, at level 3, value comes back online as intrinsic value. Does that make sense? Number 2, value is back online as intrinsic value. Once value is back online as intrinsic value, the second thing that happens is, right, we also make distinctions, right? We're able not to fall into a moral equivalent, right? I'm able not to fall into, right, a moral equivalence between different positions. I'm able actually to recreate, here's this big deal, I'm able to recreate hierarchy. Hierarchy. And level 2 denies hierarchy. This is very, very important. Level 2 views all hierarchies as, everyone with me? Dominator hierarchies. But as my friend Rianne Eisler correctly pointed out in her book, The Chalice and the Blade, there's actually a difference between a holistic hierarchy and a dominator hierarchy. There is, right, a hierarchy of values, okay? And to not live in a hierarchy of values, right, is a very big deal, okay? And to not be able to make those distinctions actually will bring massive suffering to the planet, massive death, right? Massive oppression, right, of an unimaginable kind, right? If we were unable, and by the way, there was an entire world, right, in the United States in 1936, right, which actually refused to make a hierarchical distinction between Hitler in 1936, right, and between the Western powers, and there were dozens of articles in the, early to mid 30s until 36, 37, 38, which basically said, right, you can't make a hierarchy of values, right? America's imperialist and Nazi Germany is imperialist, right? Hitler is cover of Time magazine, touted by American writers, right, in 1,000 different ways. And actually, they refused to read Mein Kampf, which Hitler published in 1923, which made it very, very clear that his values were fundamentally, right, distinct from those of the United States. And although the United States had many sins to atone for, it was a fundamentally different value structure at its very core. And even people like Jung, right, the great psychologist, who did broadcasts for the Nazi Party in 1933, swept away by the great Vogue of Germany that he felt arising, right, got lost in a world of myth, right, in a world in which hierarchies disappeared, right, particularly value hierarchies. And as Rianne Eisler, right, certainly kind of a credible and an important figure, right, in the world of emergent feminine, right, correctly points out in her beautiful book, The Chalice and the Blade, and Rianne's fantastic. She was a guest of ours for Passover Seder, and she's a major voice for the emergent feminine, right? The mistake, right, to link all hierarchies and make all hierarchies dominator hierarchies, including hierarchies of values, and not actually recognize that there's a holistic hierarchy, right, is actually a huge mistake. Okay, so this is our affirmation in love. Our affirmation in love is, yes, at level 3, right, we actually recognize on the one hand, right, we transcend and include the best of level 1, right, and the best of level 2, right? In other words, there is us, them, there are distinctions, right, and, right, there's not us, them, and we're all flawed in different ways, and we need to look carefully and resolutely and powerfully, right, at our own shadow, right, in a powerful and beautiful way. Right? That's really important. And to be able to actually, right, be able to actually do that is the evolution of love. Love collapses when distinctions can't be made, and we fall into a kind of therapeutic culture which effaces all distinctions. So this notion of these 3 levels, level 1, level 2, level 3, she comes in 3s, right, is critical. Right, it's critical. And of course, right, the levels keep going, but you're able to see very clearly, right, when you see those 3 levels, you understand very clearly where different writers are coming from. And obviously, stay really close. Obviously, no writer, right, is absolutely in level 2. All right, so when I say a writer fits into levels, it doesn't mean they don't make any distinctions. It means that the fundamental ability, right, to actually coherently make a hierarchy of values, right, and not to fall into moral equivalence, right, has actually been lost at that structure stage of consciousness. You can't actually see it. You can't feel it, right? It's only at level 3 where I'm able to actually see my own flaws, self-critique, protest against my own wars, fight against my own government, but also at the same time, right, make a distinction between different positions to create a hierarchy of values. And I'm going to say something now wildly unpopular, right, with a bunch of people. So love mad, okay? Love mad, mad. So let's just take, I'm going to give you just a good example. I'm going to take Israel, right? Right? Is the Israeli government perfect? No. Has the Israeli government made mistakes? Yes. Is there a moral equivalence between Israel and the Arab world in that war? No. Of course not. Right? Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. Right? You walk into Hadassah Hospital, right, in Israel. Walk into Hadassah Hospital, it doesn't matter whether you're Jew, right, Arab, right, what your religion is, what the color of your skin is, you'll get, right, in Israel's Hadassah Hospital, which was nominated for a Nobel Prize, you'll get the best medical treatment and humane treatment in the world. Give me a Hadassah Hospital in any Arab totalitarian capital, and we'll start to have a conversation. There's not a moral equivalence, right? And I'm a person who lived in Israel for many years, right, who protested vociferously against what I thought were mistakes and moral shortfalls of the Israeli government, because that's what we do in a democracy. We're actually able to do that. That's the quality of a democracy, right? In other words, the writer that I cited earlier, right, actually wouldn't survive Putin's Russia. They'd be completely shut down. It's only, right, in the United States where that level of consciousness can thrive. So the ability to make distinctions is critical, right? And we can't create, right? We've got to, in order to be lived as love, right? Love is discernment. Love cultivates discernment. Love is not just an emotion, and we just kind of blindly love everyone. Infatuation is blind, right? But love is a magnifying glass, and love discerns. Self-love discerns. Self-love is not a blind embrace of self. It's a blind embrace of one's intrinsic value. And then self-love leads to self-discernment and to self-transformation. So love at its core is not merely an emotion, it's a perception. When I love you, I see you. When I love a situation, I'm discerning in the situation. Okay? So kind of blithe claims, right? We stand in affirmation of love. No, yes, but no, right? The no is, no, we stand in the affirmation of love, which is discernment, right? Love is a perception. To love is to see, to be able to create distinctions. And to efface fundamental distinctions is not loving, right? In any sense, shape, or form. You cannot have love without perception. You can't have love without distinctions, okay? So let's hold here. Let's take a breather for a second, okay? Let's take a breather. How's everybody doing? Okay, we're deep in. We're deep in. So I'm gonna go for the chat box for a second. I'm gonna ask you guys something, okay? I'm gonna ask you guys something, okay? Let's breathe for a second, okay? Are you guys up for, we could do it next week? We could stop here. We just did a lot. I'd like to show you some things that are going on in Ukraine, and I want to pray together. Or we could do another piece now. It's actually the piece I intended to do this week. And I'm completely happy to stop here, but I'm just going to go for a show of hands in the chat box. Who wants to do one more piece for about 20 minutes? One more big piece? Or who wants to stop? I'm taking a look here. Hold on. We're taking a little vote here. All right. So let's see. Here we go. Let's go. Keep going. Another piece. Yes. Next week. Me. One more piece. Keep going. Pause. Says Colin. Pause here. One more piece. Right. Do piece. Another piece. Go for it. Okay. Stop. Says Rita. Hi, Rita. Love you, Rita. One more piece. Let's go. I'm in. Okay. So we've got right. Tom says save. Right. So go on. One more. Right, pray, stop, a lot to hold. Right, next week, stop, please. Continue, yes, go on, more, keep going. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. Here's our compromise, okay? It's about 50-50, okay? It's about 50-50. So let's do as follows, okay? We're gonna do a compromise. I'm not gonna do the big new piece, right? I'm not gonna do the big new piece. We've got to digest this. Okay, so we're not going to do the big new piece. What I do want to do is just feel with you, one more just little short, short 5-minute piece. Okay, is that a good compromise, everybody? I'm just one more piece. Okay, one more piece. All right. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So here we go. And Tom always tells me, not to give a time. So I take away the time that I gave to that. But I just want to do one more short piece, not the major piece that I wanted to do. Okay? Our code for this week. Okay, David, what's our code? What's our code for this week? Give us our code.
Hope is a memory of the future. So we're aspiring to that memory of the future, Mark. Hope is the memory of the future.
Okay, so this is a moment where hope is wildly important, and I want to just spend a couple of minutes, right, in a different way, and kind of talk just a little bit about hope. Okay, so I want to take a look at a clip just for 1 second, a short clip, right, of Zelensky, right, in a beautiful clip, which we have. Where he's asked, I saw the clip on Friday morning, and he's been completely gorgeous. He's been just completely and totally gorgeous, and we'll talk about what he's stood for and what that means. And we have a huge prayer that he's going to be with us next week. Right? His life's on the line, and he's been just an embodiment of, hope, an embodiment of appropriate nationalism. Right? It's not. We're against ethnocentric. Ukraine is actually ethnocentric in many ways. Ukraine's a model of a new kind of ethnocentricity, right, which is actually important. But let's just take a look at this clip from Zelensky.
Сьогодні вранці на щоденній селекторній нараді мені поставили питання логічне, зважаючи на весну, що з посівною, як її починати, і особливо у тих районах, які тимчасово окуповані. Моя відповідь дуже проста. На всій нашій землі, що б там не було, ми маємо цієї весни, як і будь-якої весни, зробити повноцінну посівну кампанію. А вже ж настільки, наскільки це можливо. Все залежить від людей і ситуації. Бо це про життя. Життя важливіше. Про наше життя. Про наші мрії, про наше майбутнє, а отже і про нашу перемогу. Я повторюю ще раз і ще раз, коли захищаємо свободу, маємо бути кожен як повноцінна армія. Робити на своєму місці усе, що можеш, щоб отримати результат, на який ми всі заслуговуємо. Це чесно, щоб здобути перемогу. Обов'язково триматися, обов'язково боротися, обов'язково віддавати всі сили. З таким сусідом легко не буде. Але з нами також, як вже з'ясувалося. Слава Україні!
So I want to just focus on, we're going to talk next week, a very, and may this week bring blessing, and may this week bring an end to death, and may this bring peace, bring, a ceasefire that actually, right, is holy and sacred. May this week bring victory to Ukraine, right, glory to Ukraine, right, and glory to the heroes, right, and I want to say that clearly, glory to Ukraine and glory to the heroes, and that's a distinction I'm making, and I'm not making an equivalence between, right, Russia, right, and the way it's acting today. Now, at the same time, right, I understand fully and clearly the utter tragedy in Russia. 12,000 Russian troops have been killed, right, with mothers and brothers. And there are tragic letters, right, from Russian troops home to their mothers right before they're killed, right? And there is massive, right, protest in Russia. When I say massive, I'm saying 40, 50,000 people have protested in Russia, which is unimaginable when there's a complete information clampdown of the most absolute nature, and we'll talk about that also, right, next week and the week after. Right, and you can go for actually calling it a war, right, instead of what Putin's calling it, which is a special operation, right? It's a special operation. That's what Putin's calling. You're not allowed to call it a war. And by saying anything that critiques Russia and the war, you can go for 15 years to the gulag, meaning your life is utterly destroyed, right? So it's a big deal. right? So Russians are actually, right, rising up in gorgeous ways, right? And at least in 30 different Russian cities, there's people who are risking their lives to stand for value, right? So of course, we're not making a distinction between good Ukrainians and bad Russians. We're making a distinction between value, okay? Between value, okay? And so let's try and track this clearly. So, right, we do end with Jan, right? We do end, right, with Zelensky. And we do say, right, glory to the heroes. We have to talk about what it means to be a hero. And we have to talk about what it means to make moral distinctions, right? We do want to say glory to Ukraine, right? Absolutely. Right? And we do, want to actually understand that we're engaged here, and I just make 2 points that we're going to close with. We're engaged here in a kind of radical peace. And that radical peace is a radical war for peace. One of the things that Barbara Marx Hubbard, my beloved evolutionary partner, used to always say, right, is that we need a peace room that's as powerful as a war room, right? Right, glory to Ukraine and glory to the heroes. So what we are here in One Mountain, with our friends all over the world, is we're a peace room. But we're a peace room that has to be activated with the transformed energy of a war room. And I've said to our friends the last decade, right, when people say to me, like, why do you work 20 hours a day? Right, because we're at war in a peace room. We're at peace, right? And the war for peace and for the kind of creation, right, of a new vision of value, of a shared language for humanity, at a moment in which we are going to be ripped apart by existential risk and catastrophic risk, of which Ukraine is actually relatively minor, is what animates us. And so we have to actually pour the same energy, right, into, right, creating the future that Zelensky gorgeously is pouring into trying to save Ukraine from the violation of its soul, of its freedom, right? And Ukraine is, of course, not part of Russia, right? Kiev was a major metropolis before there was a Moscow, right? If you know the history. And we'll talk about that also next week and the week after, right? But in other words, we're engaged, right, in a war for peace. And this is not a career, right? This is not like a, right? And it's why I didn't mention, right, the person that I was critiquing, because this is not an egoic jousting. I'm sure I love that person. It's not about that. This is about, I am passionate about truth and goodness and beauty. And I know in the very fiber of my being, I'm 1,000,000,000% clear that the only way to alleviate suffering and to actually transform reality is through one Archimedean lever, which is first principles and first values, articulated in a story of value, which becomes the new story, a shared story, not as a totalitarian imposition, not as a unipolar domination, but as a context for our diversity. That the new story of value rooted in first principles and first values is our context for diversity, right? And so I work on it 20 hours a day because we're under siege, right? And every single person that's working, right, on One Mountain, right, and that's contributing and that's resourcing and that's making their time insane, right, and being overpressed and overworked and not doing it for any sense of kind of funding, right, at all, right, quite the opposite, right, losing funds, right, so it's just a pure, right, labor of transformative love, right. I say to all those people, right, to all of you, glory to the heroes, right, glory to the revolution, right, glory to Ukraine, right. But to be a hero today means that I look up from myopic involvement in my own particular life, even it's my own particular career, and my own particular, how am I going to manifest my particular, no, right, the world is burning. The world is burning. It's burning with beauty, And it's burning with a potential collapse, with existential risk in which there'll be literally no future. And so we have to burn. We have to burn with love. We have to burn with a love which is discerning, right? We have to be allured, right, to actually create these new possibilities. And we have to be allured, right, to actually work harder than we ever could, and to run faster than we ever could, and to be more clear than we ever could, and be filled with passion, but passion that's loving. And that's denigrating. I don't have a word of denigration, not for, my dear friend Yuval Harari, we've never met, and for the colleague that I critiqued. Beautiful people, right? We're in a different kind of conversation. We got to be in a conversation which is discernment beyond egoic structures, right? We're not, commodifying, right, value and selling it as some sort of career move or organization building move. That's the old world. That's the rivalrous conflict based on win-lose metrics. That's not our game, right? And we can love madly, right, a writer that we think is making a fundamental mistake, and actually say, yes, I believe I'm absolutely right about this, and that writer is actually dead wrong. Correct. And not get lost in a kind of aperspectival madness where I'm willing to affirm moral equivalence and the collapse of value as legitimate. And the reason I'm not willing to affirm it is not because I'm stuck in, I want to make my intellectual point, because actually it will actually cause massive suffering. And it's only, right, first principles and first values. 1, 2, the recognition that value is real and intrinsic. 3, that value is evolving. 4, that value then expresses itself in a story of value, because human beings think in stories. And that 5, that story of value is not an imposed dominator hierarchy, but that story of value is a context for our diversity, a context for our unique self-symphony. That's 5. And 6, that we understand that one of the first values and first principles itself is hope. And that's what Zelensky was saying. And I want to come back to that Zelensky clip and end with this, right? Hope is a memory of the future. And what does hope mean? Hope is based on a vision of who the human being is, okay? Am I a separate self who's a psychological self, right? So I'm determined, and the psychological self says I'm determined by yesterday. Only yesterday determines me. Only antecedent prior causes determine me. So I got to rework my past and my trauma the best I can. And I kind of have a kind of identity politics. Putin is an ultimate example of identity politics, right? And I've got to actually right the terrible wrongs and traumas of yesterday. It's identity politics writ large on the international stage. That's the psychological self. And part of that psychological self is, for example, notions that we deny free will. So I'm purely determined by yesterday, antecedent causes, yesterday's psychological causes. Then there's no reason for hope. I can do the best therapy I can, but ultimately I have no free will. And, right, my past is my past. I can't really change it. So I can do my best to come to terms with my trauma. That's as far as I can get in the therapeutic culture. And then there's the mystical self, or the enlightened self, which is, right, the kind of be here now world, represented by people like Eckhart Tolle, and Eckhart's beautiful. But basically, it's not about the past, it's about the present. There is no past, there is no future. It's beyond value. It's about the fullness of the present moment and the presence in which all lives, the eternity that resides in a moment. But that's an eternity that resides in a moment that actually ignores past and future, right? And actually ignores history in a very fundamental way. Okay, so it says move beyond story, but actually story matters. And then there's a third possibility, and that third possibility we call homo amor, and we call evolutionary unique self. And evolutionary self, right, is filled with hope, because I actually understand that evolution is an intrinsic process of the unfolding of value. Evolution is the evolution of value. And it's actually a kind of value gravity, if you will, that is the alluring structure of reality. That it's actually the emergence of the evolution of the good, the true, and the beautiful. The evolution of the good, the true, and the beautiful, the evolution of love is the storyline of cosmos. And there is a developmental hierarchy, right? And there is more and less love, right? And at level 3, right? Not at kind of level 1, us, them, right? A deep sense that actually reality is animated by eros, which is evolutionary love. And the plot line, right? Or the movement that's caused by evolutionary love is the evolution of love. And we participate in that. And we're called by the future, right? There's a future self that's actually calling us, right? The future actually lives in the present, the name of God, right, in Hebrew mysticism is the Yud, which is the future, right, in the Hey Vav Hey, which is Hoved, the present. So it's the impossible conjugation of the future that lives in the present that calls us forward. So we're filled with hope. Yes, Zelensky, you're gorgeous. Yes, we have to sow in the spring. Yes, the spring represents renewal. It represents new possibility. But it's not just cyclical. It's not just a cyclical, right, movement, a circle of seasons. It's a spiral of the evolution of love. And this is a moment where there's a crack. There's a crack in the facade. And in this moment that there's a crack in the facade, there's a possibility to actually evolve love, to actually reclaim intrinsic value, but evolving value, right? To revision, right? A new story of value, right? As we said last week, Putin has called the West back to its own sense of value. The West has remembered that it stood for value. There's still lots of voices who don't want to accept that. But the reason, right, the West has been able to cohere and to create a new coherence, because that new coherence is based on, right, a realization that we actually have a shared vision of value. We now need that. That's going to be a passing moment in the West. It's going to be gone soon. We need to actually seize this moment, right? Seize the possibility. Carpe diem, right? And actually step in and not redouble our efforts, but triple and quadruple and quintuple our efforts to actually stand for something new and something possible, okay? So glory to the heroes in Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine. And glory to the heroes who are here in one mountain, because we are heroes together. You're heroes. Every single person here who shows up, who resources, who steps into a project, right? No one, right, is doing this for any sense of funding at all. Quite the opposite, as I said, right? For many of us, it's a huge depletion of funding, right? But it's not about funding. It's not about egoic. It's about that actually we are taking responsibility as a band of outrageous lovers for the future. And our hope is not naive. Hope is actually not only realistic in the sense that it's validated by realpolitik. Reality does change. Reality does emerge. Right? Democracy has emerged. Human rights has emerged. Right? We have moved, right, from dirt to Shakespeare, from quarks to culture, from Bach to bacteria. We have moved, right, in the direction of the evolution of love. Right? Actually, all of the energy and hope of the Big Bang, right, is actually with us in this moment in evolution. Right? Evolution lives in us, right? Evolutionary desire lives in us. So this entire conversation today was not a political analysis. It wasn't a lecture in moral philosophy, right? And I love, right, the chat box, and I love the agreement and the conversation and the challenge and the pathos, and right, and that's all perfect, right? But we're here as evolution. We're not here as this person or that person or that person. We are right now in the second, evolution itself, awake and alive. Right? We are evolutionary desire. We are evolutionary love, yearning, right, to create a future. And we're filled with hope. Hope is a memory of the future. And what we are here in One Mountain, Many Paths, right? You're heroes and you're a memory of the future. And this unique self symphony is a memory of the future. And we don't skip, we don't sloganeer. We did the hard work today. We did hard work today. We just got to the first piece of 8 I wanted to do. Yes, Tom, right? My sense of time is not good. You're right. I apologize, right? You're totally right, right? But wow, right? Like, wow, right? That's who we are. Like, oh my God. 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 I'm just so, and I apologize. I mean this in the most gentle way, not as a teacher, but literally as just, a boy and just a spiritual friend. Right? We're each other's spiritual friend. I'm so crazy proud of everyone here. I'm so crazy proud of who you are and what you are and what we are together. So we're going to finish just in 1 second with Hallelujah, played on a violin, right, from a bunker, right, in the Ukraine. Thank you, everyone. Right? Krista, close us up, dear friend. Take us inside the last step. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marc Gafni, and thank each and every one of us for being willing to step in, to stay in, to be the heroes, and to be hope as a memory of the future. And in this part, every week, for those of you who are new, I get to invite all of us to participate in this unique self-symphony, because as this beautiful violinist plays her unique instrument, we are all called, we are all invited to participate in this revolution in the way that our hearts desire. So one of the ways you can do that is, one particular need that we have right now is for someone to step in and help us with editing these weekly teachings every week. We have a person that creates a beautiful transcript from these weekly teachings. And then we have our beloved Joycey, who does a first edit on them. And then the next step would be to take that edit and turn it into a beautiful article that we can post online. So if you are really excellent and great at editing and writing and reorganizing content in a beautiful way, then I would love to hear from you and co-create with you every week. I'll put my email in the chat box so you can reach out to me. Also, if you feel other things emerging in you, excitement, ways that you want to contribute or participate, please find me and we would love to get to know you. Of course, a big way to participate is by funding and by resourcing. And we do that by becoming an evolutionary partner. So I just want to take one moment to show you our website where you can find all the information on that. You go to onemountainmanypaths.org. And if you click here on partnership, you can read what it means to become an evolutionary partner. And we all invite each other and encourage each other to give as much as you can. So most people are giving $100 a month, but you can feel into what feels most true and good and beautiful for you. And if you do become a member, if you scroll down, you can see here below all the courses that you get access to that you can study on your own. These are all the core first principles and first values as articulated by Marc Gafni, but also courses together with Barbara Marx Hubbard, like this course, Becoming a Future Human. So as a member of One Mountain, you get access to all of that. I just want to show you one other thing. If you go here to events and you click on weekly live teaching, this is the page where every week we announce the topic of the next week. So you can read that here, but also this is a beautiful thing to share with your friends and invite your friends to come to One Mountain next week. So of course, we will be in this conversation on Ukraine for a couple more weeks. So please find this page and share it with your friends. And if you click here on the watch page, that is where we upload every week the replay of the teachings. So that's also a beautiful thing to share with your friends and share the Dharma and the teachings and invite them to come to next Sunday. So thank you so much for participating in that way and for showing up here every week. And I can't wait to see you again next week. Right now, we're going to end as we close every week with embodiment, with dance, with feeling each other and feeling the energy. And we do that with this beautiful song, We Are the People. And Kirsten, I saw you put the lyrics in the chat box. Maybe you can do that again, because it's such a powerful song. And we sing it and we dance it every week. But right now it gets even more meaning. So hear that song, hear the lyrics resonate in your body and feel that this is really ours to do together. So let's blow it out. Let's dance it out. Let's bring each other onto the screen so we can see each other. Thank you so much and see you next week.
We are the people.